the Chinese foreign policy towards India has become quite antagonistic. And this is what we are watching on the boundary dispute to the geopolitical issues.
Welcome to another edition of the Forum 2000 online chats. My name is Sascha Hannig, and I will be moderating today's conversation. As the world dives into a new chapters in terms of security, one of the world's largest democracy, India, is becoming increasingly important in the international sphere discussions and has long been a very important actor due to its surroundings. To discuss this, today we will have a very important speaker, Dr. Jagannath Panda. Dr. Panda is the head of the Stockholm Centre of South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs at the Institute for Security and Development Policy in Sweden. Dr. Panda, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Sascha. It's my pleasure to talk to you.
Dr. Panda, since May 2020, several news regarding the skirmishes between India and China had made it to the international news headlines several times. Considering that these two giants gather a two-digit share of the world population, we're talking about thousands of millions of people, what can you tell us about the relation between China and India, and what are the repercussions of the skirmishes that have been going on during these last years?
I think we have to understand the dynamics of China-India relations from both domestic and foreign policy point of view of both the countries. If we try to understand from the Chinese side, there is a lot happening domestically under the presidency of Xi Jinping. Under Xi Jinping's presidency, the Chinese foreign policy has become quite assertive, and India has definitely emerged as a greater competitor in Xi Jinping's foreign policy assessment. So therefore, the Chinese foreign policy towards India has become quite antagonistic. And this is what we are watching on the boundary dispute to the geopolitical issues. And particularly if we take into assessment last 4 to 5 years Chinese foreign policy approach towards India, but there is a consensus among the Chinese policymakers and Chinese strategic thinkers and political leaders that India is emerging as a stronger powers than earlier, and this is not definitely a good news for China, and therefore the Chinese foreign policy is seeing India in a much more competitive and in rival terms, and therefore today we see a much more stronger China creating problems on the boundary dispute. Of course, with each of this dispute and conflict with India on the boundary dispute, we are witnessing new Chinese claim. And that is what a worrisome factor, and that is a troublesome factor as far as China-India relation is concerned. From India's point of view, if we try to understand, and I think there is a lot of changes is taking place in India's domestic politics as well as in foreign policy terms. Domestically, there is a consensus within India has emerged that India needs to carry out a lot of infrastructure, connectivity developments, and India needs to have a much more united front in order to face the adversaries. And this is what the current government in Delhi is actually trying to create a national consensus in favor of India. And that is aptly reflected not only within India's developmental point of view domestically, but also in terms of foreign policy approach. And in that context, China is emerging as a stronger competitor and a stronger rival for Indian foreign policy. And this is what also we are seeing, that India is responding quite strongly to China on the boundary issues, be it the Doklam incident in 2017 or the Galwan incident in 2019 and 20. We saw that India responding hard and not really succumbing to any Chinese pressure. So China-India relations is going to enter into a very delicate and dynamic phase, and I think it is going to be continuously being tense and tested from time to time, and we should be mindful about that.
Mm-hmm. In that context, obviously, India has a relevant geopolitical position. I wanted to take you to how it matches with other powers in the region, because after the Indonesian tsunami of 2004, Japan, the US, Australia, and India joined in a security agreement called the Quad. that didn't last long at the beginning, but that since the situation in the Asia Pacific has become more tense, as you already mentioned, has been reborn along with the rise of other partnerships such as the Australian, UK, US, or the Five Eyes cooperation agreements, which have become more relevant for each country's administrations at the end. What is the role of India in this broader Asia-Pacific sphere? And do you think these partnerships are only about countering China, or is there other agenda related to them?
I think Indian foreign policy is continuously evolving and transitioning from issue to issue, from region to regions, trying to take each of these regions to its foreign policy course much more seriously than earlier. And it is linked with India's economic competence, India's changing diplomacy, and India's changing pattern of thinking in international relations. And this is what we are watching in India's foreign policy. But I think over the last 5 to 6 years, what we are watching is that Indo-Pacific as a concept is gaining ground, not only across the world, but also particularly in Indian foreign policy. And Prime Minister Modi, the Indian government has actually promoted the concept Indo-Pacific in a much more, much more universal and much more consultative manner. And to that effect, I think there is a lot of focus on the maritime issues. There is a lot of focus on the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and also there is a lot of focus on the partnerships. So therefore, today what we are talking about, Quad formulation, or the Quad Plus formulations, or the AUKUS formulations, or let's say Five Eyes formulations, these are the necessary minilateral groupings which are gaining grounds in Indian foreign policy. Of course, India is not a part of each one of these multilateral minilateral forums, but I think when it comes to critical variables, critical minilateral forums in Indo-Pacific, be it Quad Plus, I think India is a critical partner, and this is what is being reflected in its foreign policy. But among all of this, dynamism that is there in Indian foreign policy, we have to understand that this is the core behind India's approach towards Indo-Pacific is to stay engaged, to realize that India is a critical actor in the Indo-Pacific. And this is based with India's national interest. If we see India's national interest, it wants to engage with the regions geo-economically. It also wants to stay engaged with the Indo-Pacific regions in terms of geopolitical terms. So I think when it comes to geostrategic, geopolitics, and geoeconomics, India is gaining a ground as a central actor. And this is what we are also noticing in Indian foreign policy. But also, I think very briefly, I'll mention one point by saying that there is a slight evolution is taking place in Indian foreign policy, or one might call it a slight shift in focus. There was a non-aligned foreign policy, chartered in Indian foreign policy a decade back. It has transitioned systematically and gradually to a more non-aligned, more autonomous way of thinking, what we called as a strategic autonomy. And then today it is being moved into a direction where we are having more pointed alignment kind of engagement. What I have been calling is a kind of point and alignment strategy. So India's linkages and relationship with Quad, India's relationship with the Quad Plus, India's partnership with the Indo-Pacific, like-minded countries, it is a part of this pointed alignment strategy, where the focus is to gain grounds on the defense and security fronts, and also to stay engaged economically and politically. And this is what is being noticed in Indian foreign policy. And behind all of this thing, China is definitely an influencing factor, and China is definitely encouraging India to move towards more aligning with the West and aligning with the rules-based order that the whole world is today talking about. So definitely, China is a critical factor in India's foreign policy evolution.
Mm-hmm. And just briefly, how do you balance the effectiveness of the Quad 2.0 or the new Quad agreement? Do you see it working, or it has just been some discussion about it without real actions being taken up on it?
I think Quad has systematically evolved as a credible forum. If we talk about Quad 1.0, which actually vanished, but then the Quad 2.0 from 2017 onwards, the ministerial meeting has actually given it a direction. And today we have the leadership meeting. Today we have the continuous official meetings happening among the Quad countries, and that itself talks about the systematization within the Quad process and how the Quad process is evolving as a mature forum. But while saying that, I think Quad 2.0 or the Quad in its current form is still a very non-security oriented forum. Even though we are continuously discussing about security issues and critical defense oriented issues which are critical and which are key to the future of the Indo-Pacific, but Quad is not a binding forum. There is no agreement per se. It is more of a consultative forum which is talking about soft security issues. So I think Quad is going to evolve further. There is a systematic evolution is happening in Quad, and this is in India's interest as much as with the other partners countries in the Quad, be it the US, be it Japan or Australia. And I think Quad is in the interest of all the four countries, including the like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific. But again, I think Quad is yet to evolve as a very credible formal organization or a formal forum, because there is no formal agreement as of yet. There is no legal binding attached to the Quad forum. This is still a very consultative forum. But I think what is also positive about the Quad is that there is a Quad Plus forum happening, and that is about the like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific regions, those countries who have got interest to be associated with the Quad countries. They are welcome to participate, and it is an open forum. And we are seeing South Korea today participating, we are seeing Israel participating, we are seeing Vietnam participating, and that would encourage many countries to think that Indo-Pacific is here to stay, and probably the time has come. We need to talk about democracy, we need to talk about rules-based order, and I think we need to talk about Indo-Pacific, which is actually critical for the future of humankind.
I want to take you to another topic, because you mentioned democracy, you mentioned conversations, and I think none of us can avoid the question about what's happening now in Ukraine and the Indian position over it, especially because the lack of condemnation against Russia has been criticized internationally, especially in a scenario where some countries that have historically been neutral have avoided upon all cost to criticize Russia, and have done it right now, haven't they? How do you framework India's response to what's happening in Ukraine, and what do you think India should do in this next phase?
I think the war that Russia has launched against Ukraine has to be condemned, has to be criticized. And here I think my compliments to the Forum 2000 for standing for the Ukrainian cause and trying to be with the humanitarian cause that is there, or humanitarian crisis that has arrived to address. And I think my compliments to the Forum 2000 for standing about it. But about my personal take, I think here is that if we try to understand India's position has to be understood in terms of its own, in terms of India's own foreign policy standing. And I think that should not be forgotten. And I think if we see India's stance on the Ukraine crisis, there has been criticism from India. India has condemned Russia's attack on Ukraine. So there is no doubt about that. But I think the difference here lies is that the West and the whole of the European communities expects India to do more, to stand more eloquently to oppose the Russian attack, given that India has a very good historical past relationship with Russia. And therefore, there is a huge expectation from India as a democratic country to stand for the Ukrainian cause. And I think there definitely India has definitely fallen short. India's stance explains that, primarily because again, it's the foreign policy decision making that looks at the national interest of each of the countries, and therefore Indian foreign policy makers probably have seen India's national interest taken India's national interest into account, and therefore they have not really been that severe on Russia, particularly at the UN, and decided to abstain from the voting. And I think which has actually gone against India in terms of public opinion internationally, and therefore India has been criticized quite massively. But I think here also what we have to keep it in mind that having a good relationship with Russia is in India's national security interest. Russia is not only a closer defense partner, Russia is also a critical multilateral partner for India to balance out Chinese outrage. India is associated very strongly with Russia in the multilateral forums like BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa Forum, which is about the emerging economies. So there, India actually ties with Russia to balance out Chinese influence. In AIIB, both India and Russia are the two biggest, voting shareholder after China. So that also allows to stay, engaged with Russia and check the Chinese influence. So it makes sense for India not to spoil the relationship with Russia and not to really, go against the Russian interest while condemning the Russian action plan in Ukraine and particularly the military attack. And India has done that to my impression.
Thank you, Doctor. It has been a pleasure to listen to your point of view today.
Thank you very much, Sascha, for this conversation. I really enjoyed it, and my compliments to the Forum 2000 again for promoting the cause of democracy, transparency, and rule of law in international politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will also join you and thank Forum 2000 for making this conversation possible. And to all of you who are watching this online, we hope to see you again soon.